Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really leaning into a major figure, the prophet Elijah.
Absolutely. One of the most dynamic figures in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, and we've got a good mix of sources: Bethel AG Church Study Guide, the detailed Wikipedia entry, and an article from Christianity.com. Our plan is to sift through these and pull out the key story beats, the surprises, and what it all means for you.
It's perfect for a deep dive. Elijah, he just sort of bursts onto the scene during a really critical, messy time in ancient Israel's history.
Right, the kingdom's divided north and south.
Exactly. And up north in Israel, you've got King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. And they're not just tolerating Baal worship, they're actively pushing it, aggressively rejecting the relationship with Yahweh, the God of Israel.
So the stage is set for some serious conflict.
Definitely. And into this steps Elijah.
Even his name, right?
Yeah.
Yahweh is God. It's like a mission statement from the get-go.
Precisely. And the sources mention his appearance, this hairy skin with a leather belt. He looks like he came straight from the wilderness, sets him apart immediately.
And his story, well, it's anything but dull, isn't it?
Not at all. Full of these dramatic confrontations, miracles, but also, surprisingly, these moments of real vulnerability. And his legacy, as the sources show, it's huge. Spans across different faiths.
Okay, let's dive in. His entrance is, well, pretty bold.
Bold is an understatement. He walks straight up to King Ahab the king and declares there's going to be no dew or rain for years unless he, Elijah, says so.
Wow. Just like that?
Just like that. And think about it. Baal was the Canaanite god of rain and fertility.
So he's directly challenging Baal's power base.
Exactly. He's telling Ahab and everyone that Yahweh controls the weather, not Baal, and Elijah speaks for him.
But then, right after this massive public challenge, God tells him to hide.
Yeah, it's kind of jarring, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
He's sent off to the Brook Cherith east of the Jordan. And here's one of those interesting little details the sources flag up. The text says ravens fed him, bread and meat, twice a day. But there's a linguistic point. The Hebrew word, depending on vowel pointing, which came later, could potentially mean Arabs.
Huh. So miracle birds, or maybe nomadic people helping him out.
It's a point of debate. The traditional view, the plain reading, is ravens. A clear miracle using these ritually unclean birds, which really emphasizes God's power over rules and nature.
Right.
The argument for Arabs points to the parallel with what happens next. God using non-Israelites, Gentiles, to care for his prophet. One source mentions the practical difficulty of, unclean birds delivering clean food.
Makes sense. But ravens is the usual translation.
Yeah, that's the dominant tradition. Either way, the point is clear. God provides for him supernaturally while he's isolated during this drought he announced.
And the brook eventually dries up, naturally.
Because of the drought, yes. So God sends him somewhere even more surprising.
Where's that?
Zarephath, which is in Phoenicia, outside Israel.
Gentile territory. Jezebel's home turf, basically.
Pretty much. And he's not sent to someone important, but to a poor widow. The irony is thick, right? Famine in Israel. And God's prophet is sustained by a foreign widow in a pagan land.
And she's basically destitute when he arrives.
Down to her last handful of flour and a little bit of oil. She tells Elijah she's making one last meal for her and her son, then they're expecting to die.
That's bleak.
It is. But Elijah tells her, make me a little cake first.
Take some nerve. And faith on her part.
Incredible faith. And she does it. She obeys. And then the miracle. The jar of flour and the jug of oil. They don't run out. They keep providing day after day until the rains finally return.
That's amazing. It's not just provision, it's multiplying her tiny bit of resource because she acted in faith.
Exactly. Shows faith isn't about having a lot to start with. But the story with the widow, it gets even more intense.
Yeah.
Her son gets sick, and he dies.
Oh, no. After everything. That must have been crushing for her and for Elijah.
Absolutely. A real crisis of faith, you'd imagine. He takes the boy, carries him upstairs to his room, lays him on the bed. And he stretches himself out over the child 3 times, crying out to God. It's raw, desperate.
Not some neat magic spell.
No, it's desperate prayer. And God hears him. The boy comes back to life. And the widow's response is crucial. She says, now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth. It deepens her faith profoundly. It wasn't just the food. It was power over death itself.
Incredible sequence of events, provision, life itself. But like you said, he's still human. One source mentions James 5.1-7, Elijah was as human as we are.
That verse is key, isn't it? It grounds him. Despite these extraordinary miracles, he's not somehow beyond human struggle. And we really see that later.
Yeah, that vulnerability comes through. But first, Mount Carmel, the big one.
Oh yeah, the showdown. After 3.5 years of drought, God tells Elijah, go, present yourself to Ahab. It's time.
And Elijah proposes this contest.
On Mount Carmel, settle it once and for all, Yahweh or Baal, who is the real God in Israel.
And it's Elijah versus how many?
450 prophets of Baal. The sources sometimes mention 400 prophets of Asherah, too, linked to Jezebel, but they don't seem to be part of this specific contest on the mountain. It's God versus Baal.
The setup is simple, right? 2 altars, 2 bulls, but no fire.
Exactly. The God who answers with fire, he is God. The Baal prophets go first.
And they try everything.
All morning into the afternoon, shouting, dancing, chanting, nothing.
And this is where Elijah turns up the heat, so to speak, with sarcasm.
He starts mocking them. Shout louder, he says. Perhaps he's thinking, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened.
Ouch. That's biting.
It really is. And the Baal prophets get even more frantic, shouting louder, cutting themselves with swords and spears, which the sources note was part of their ritual practice. Still nothing. Silence from heaven.
Then it's Elijah's turn, and he makes it deliberately harder, doesn't he?
Dramatically harder.
Yeah.
He repairs the Lord's altar using 12 stones, 1 for each tribe of Israel, a statement in itself. Then he digs a big trench around it.
Okay.
And then he has people pour water jars and jars of it over the sacrifice, over the wood, 3 times, until the water fills the trench completely.
So any chance of hidden fire or, some natural explanation?
Pretty much impossible. The sources mention speculations people have made over the years, lightning strike, maybe some flammable substance like naphtha, focusing sunlight but drenching everything like that. It makes a natural explanation incredibly unlikely. It seems designed to show this has to be supernatural.
Okay, so it's waterlogged. Then what?
Then Elijah prays. And his prayer is so different from the frenzy of the Baal prophets. It's simple, calm, direct. Basically, Lord, show them you are God in Israel, and I'm your servant, and I've done this at your command. Answer me so they know you are God.
And the answer?
Immediate and overwhelming. Fire falls from heaven.
It just burns the sacrifice.
Burns everything. The sacrifice, the wood, the stones of the altar, the dust underneath, and it licks up all the water in the trench. Gone.
Oh, wow.
The people watching, they just fall on their faces. They get it. The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God.
Yeah.
The debate is over. Decisively.
And what happens to the prophets of Baal?
The aftermath is harsh. Elijah orders the people to seize them. He takes them down to the Kishon River Valley and executes them.
Wow. Okay. And then the rain.
Immediately after, Elijah tells Ahab to go eat and drink. Because he hears the sound of a heavy rain, he goes up the mountain to pray, sends his servant to look towards the sea 7 times, and finally a small cloud appears, grows rapidly, and a massive downpour begins, ending the drought.
The ultimate vindication. Power over fire, power over rain.
Total victory for Yahweh. You'd think Elijah would be riding high after this. Untouchable.
But that's not how it goes, is it? This is where that human vulnerability really kicks in.
Exactly. Ahab tells Jezebel everything that happened. And she's not intimidated. She's furious. She sends a messenger to Elijah.
With a threat.
A death threat. May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. She swears to kill him within 24 hours.
And the man who faced down 450 prophets, he runs.
He runs for his life, flees south, deep into the wilderness of Judah. He goes a day's journey, sits down under a broom tree, and he just breaks. He asks God to take his life. I've had enough, Lord, he says. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors.
Wow. From the height of Carmel to the depths of despair under a tree.
The sources really emphasize this state. Exhausted, terrified, feeling utterly alone, defeated, maybe even depressed.
Yeah.
Full of self-pity. He genuinely believes he's the only faithful person left in all of Israel.
And this is right after maybe the biggest public miracle since Moses.
It's a stark contrast.
Yeah.
And it's such a powerful lesson the sources pull out. Massive spiritual victories don't make you immune to fear, burnout, or despair. It's incredibly human.
So how does God respond to him in this state?
With surprising gentleness. Not with rebuke, but with care. An angel touches him, tells him to get up and eat. There's bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He eats, drinks, and lies down again.
Just letting him rest and recover.
Yes. And then the angel comes back a second time. Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. God provides physical sustenance and rest first.
And that food gives him strength for quite a journey, right?
An epic journey. 40 days and 40 nights, fueled by that meal, all the way to Mount Horeb.
Horeb. That's Mount Sinai, isn't it? Where Moses received the law.
The very same place. foundational ground for Israel's faith. And as one source points out, Elijah is the only person mentioned in the Bible after Moses' time who returned to that specific sacred mountain.
So he gets there, finds a cave. What happens?
God speaks to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?"
And Elijah basically repeats his complaint.
Pretty much. "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." That sense of isolation and failure is still strong.
So God gives him another spectacular sign.
Well, yes and no. God tells him, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord." Then comes a powerful wind, shattering rocks. But the text says the Lord was not in the wind.
Okay.
After the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire reminiscent of Carmel, maybe. But the Lord was not in the fire.
So all this power, but God isn't in it.
Exactly. And after the fire, a gentle whisper. Some translations say a still small voice.
That's the contrast. The power at Carmel versus the quiet voice at Horeb.
It's profound. God's presence isn't just in the thunder and flames, it's also in the quiet intimacy, the gentle guidance. It's a huge lesson. The sources suggest maybe Elijah was looking for God in more judgment, more fire, but God met him in the quiet.
And what does God say in that whisper?
He asks the same question again. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah gives the same answer. But this time, God doesn't just listen. He gives him new instructions. He recommissions him.
What's the new mission?
"Go back the way you came. Anoint Hazael king over Aram. Anoint Jehu king over Israel. And crucially, anoint Elisha son of Shaphat to succeed you as prophet."
So specific political and spiritual tasks. He's being sent back into the fray.
Yes, but not alone. And God gives him this vital piece of reassurance. "Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him."
He wasn't the only one left.
Not even close. A powerful reminder that God always preserves a faithful remnant, even when things look bleakest. And that sense of isolation Elijah felt, while real to him, wasn't the whole picture.
So renewed, recommissioned, and knowing he's not alone, Elijah sets out to find his successor, Elisha.
Right. He finds Elisha plowing a field. And the detail about 12 yoke of oxen, that's a lot. Suggests Elisha's family was pretty well off, as one source notes.
So Elisha wasn't some wandering ascetic.
Seems unlikely. And Elijah's call is symbolic, but clear. He just walks by and throws his cloak, his mantle, over Elisha.
The passing of the mantle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Signifying the transfer of prophetic authority. And Elisha gets it immediately. He asks to say goodbye to his family, then slaughters his oxen, uses the plowing equipment for fuel, boils the meat, gives it to the people, and then sets off to follow Elijah.
Total commitment, leaving everything behind.
A significant cost, the sources emphasize. He becomes Elijah's attendant.
Now, Elijah still has some confrontations left, doesn't he? Before his final departure, he runs into Ahab again.
Yes, over the incident with Naboth's vineyard. This is a grim story.
Ahab wants this vineyard next to his palace, but Naboth won't sell because it's his ancestral inheritance.
Right, so Jezebel steps in. She arranges for false witnesses to accuse Naboth of cursing both God and the king, a capital offense.
And Naboth is
Dragged out and stoned to death. Then Jezebel tells Ahab, "Go take possession of the vineyard," a blatant abuse of power and murder.
And Elijah shows up right then.
Just as Ahab is walking into his ill-gotten vineyard, perfect timing, Elijah confronts him and delivers this devastating prophecy. "In the place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood. Yes, yours." And he pronounces doom on Ahab's entire family line.
Harsh. Did Ahab react?
He actually showed remorse, tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, fasted. And because of this temporary repentance, the sources note, God told Elijah he would delay the disaster for Ahab's house until his son's reign.
Interesting. And speaking of his son, Ahaziah, Elijah confronts him too, right?
Yes. King Ahaziah falls and injures himself. So he sends messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of the Philistine city of Ekron, whether he'll recover.
Consulting a pagan god instead of Yahweh.
Exactly. Elijah intercepts the messengers. "Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going off to consult Baal-zebub?" He sends them back with a message, Hazael will not recover. He will die.
Ahaziah is not pleased, I assume.
Not at all. He sends a captain with 50 soldiers to arrest Elijah. They find him sitting on top of a hill and command him to come down.
And Elijah
Calls down fire from heaven, consuming the captain and his men.
Whoa, he does it again.
Yes. The king sends another captain with 50 men. Same demand, same fiery result.
Okay, the king should be getting the message now.
You'd think. He sends a third captain with 50 men. But this captain is smart. He goes up, falls on his knees before Elijah and pleads, "Man of God, please spare my life and the lives of these 50 servants of yours." He acknowledges Elijah's power.
And that works.
It does. An angel tells Elijah to go down with him, not to be afraid. So Elijah goes and delivers the prophecy of death directly to Ahaziah's face. And the king dies, just as Elijah said.
Power and authority right to the end of his interactions with Israel's kings. Now, there's a slightly puzzling detail mentioned in the sources, a letter.
Ah, yes, the letter from Elijah to Jehoram, king of Judah. The puzzle is that Jehoram receives this letter after Elijah has already been taken up into heaven.
So how did that work?
Good question. The sources offer different explanations. Maybe Elijah wrote it before his ascension, knowing what Jehoram would do, and arranged for it to be delivered later. Or maybe it was a different, lesser-known Elijah. Some rabbinic traditions even suggest it was delivered supernaturally years later. It's one of those textual details that sparks a lot of interpretive discussion.
Fascinating. Okay, let's talk about that departure itself, because it's unique in the Bible.
Truly unique. The final journey he takes with Elisha is significant too. They travel from Gilgal to Bethel to Jericho down to the Jordan River. At each place, Elijah tells Elisha to stay behind, but Elisha refuses. "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you."
Some sources see symbolism in those places.
Yes, potentially stages of a spiritual journey. Gilgal, separation beginnings. Bethel, house of God. Jericho, place of battle. And then down to the Jordan, symbolic of crossing over, death, new beginnings.
And Elijah sticks right with him.
Absolutely. When they reach the Jordan River, Elijah takes his cloak, rolls it up, and strikes the water.
And like Moses at the Red Sea.
The water divides. They walk across on dry ground. Echoes of Moses, echoes of Joshua crossing the Jordan into the Promised Land. It connects Elijah to that foundational history.
And on the other side, Elisha makes a request.
Yes. Elijah asks, "What can I do for you before I'm taken from you?" And Elisha asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit.
What exactly does that mean? Twice the power.
Not necessarily twice the miracle power, the sources explain. It's more about inheritance. In that culture, the firstborn son received a double share of the father's inheritance. Elisha is essentially asking to be recognized as Elijah's primary spiritual heir, to inherit his prophetic mantle and authority.
To be the successor.
To be the clear successor, yes. Elijah says it's a hard thing Elisha has asked, but if Elisha sees him when he is taken, it will be granted.
And then the moment arrives.
As they're walking and talking, suddenly this happens. A chariot of fire and horses of fire appear between them, separating them. And Elijah is taken up to heaven in a whirlwind.
Just gone, up into the sky.
Gone. Not death as we normally understand it. The sources often call it Elijah's translation.
And Elisha sees it happen.
He sees it. And he cries out this famous line, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel," recognizing Elijah's foundational importance and power. Then he picks up Elijah's cloak, which had fallen off.
The mantle.
The mantle. He goes back to the Jordan, strikes the water with the cloak, asking, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And the water divides for him too.
Clear proof.
Mm-hmm.
The spirit, the authority has passed to Elisha.
Unmistakable sign. This whole departure scene, it's incredibly vivid. And it draws that parallel the sources mentioned to Enoch back in Genesis, who also walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more because God took him away.
But like the ravens Arabs thing or the letter that's taken up into heaven part, it's also interpreted differently, isn't it?
It is. The most common traditional view is a literal ascent into the presence of God, into heaven. But some interpretations, noted in the sources, raise questions. Does heaven here mean the sky or the highest heaven? Could it mean he was transported somewhere else on earth, hidden away?
And they sometimes bring up that verse in John's Gospel.
Right, John 3:13, where Jesus says, "No one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man." Some use this to argue that maybe Elijah's and Enoch's ascension wasn't to the ultimate highest heaven in the way Jesus's was. The mysterious letter to Jehoram sometimes fuels this idea too easier to explain if Elijah was still somewhere on earth.
So again, a point where the text allows for or even invites different understandings.
Exactly. It shows how these narratives continue to be explored and debated. And speaking of ongoing significance, Elijah's story doesn't just end there. His influence stretches way beyond the Hebrew Bible.
Into other major religions, he really has this incredible cross-cultural resonance.
He really does. Let's start with Judaism.
Okay. In Judaism, he's huge, right? Tied to the Messiah.
Absolutely central. Based on the prophecy in Malachi 4, he's expected to return as the precursor to the Messiah. This isn't just theology, it's woven into practice.
Like Elijah's chair.
Exactly. At every bris, the circumcision ceremony, a special chair is set aside for Elijah. He's considered the guardian of the covenant. One source gives a fascinating rabbinic reason. Because Elijah complained at Horeb that Israel had abandoned the covenant, God supposedly told him he'd have to be present at every future sign of that covenant.
Wow. And then there's Passover.
Elijah's cup. A cup of wine is filled for him at the cedar table, and often the doors open briefly, symbolizing the hope and expectation of his arrival, heralding redemption.
I heard there was a practical reason for the cup, too.
Yeah, one source mentions a rabbinic debate about whether a specific part of the ceremony required a fourth or fifth cup of wine. They couldn't decide, so they said, let's set aside a fifth cup for Elijah. When he comes, he'll resolve all disputes, including this one.
Ah, that's great. So
in a way. He's also mentioned in the Havdalah ceremony that ends Shabbat, with prayers for his coming in the week ahead.
And he shows up in folklore, too.
Oh, absolutely. Loads of stories where Elijah appears, often disguised as a poor man, a beggar, or a scholar, to test people or help those in need. There's a famous story about Rabbi Joshua ben Levi traveling with Elijah.
What happens in that one?
Elijah does things that seem unjust, like killing a poor widow's only cow after she showed them hospitality, or repairing a wall for a rich, inhospitable man. Rabbi Joshua is baffled.
Understandably.
But Elijah explains. He saw the angel of death coming for the widow, so he prayed the cow would be taken instead. The wall he repaired for the rich man. It was hiding a treasure, and by fixing the wall without being asked, he ensured the selfish man wouldn't find it easily. It teaches about divine perspective, that things aren't always as they seem. Apparent bad luck might be a hidden blessing, and vice versa.
That adds such a rich layer to his character. There's another story, too, about Rabbi Eliezer.
Yes, where Rabbi Eliezer insults a man for being ugly, only to find out it's Elijah in disguise. Elijah refuses to forgive him until the whole community pleads for him, teaching a lesson about humility and recognizing God's creation in everyone.
These folk traditions really bring him to life. The sources also mention speculation about his origins, like which tribe or if he was an angel.
Yeah, various ideas float around from the tribe of Gad or Benjamin, maybe a priest. Some even identified him with Phinehas, the zealous priest from Numbers. Shows how much people have pondered his mysterious background.
Okay, shifting to Christianity, how does the New Testament see Elijah?
He looms large there too, primarily through John the Baptist.
Jesus identifies John as the Elijah who was to come, right?
Explicitly, yes. In Matthew and Luke, John's whole persona, the camel hair clothing, the leather belt, his message of repentance, judgment, being in the wilderness near the Jordan, it all screamed Elijah to the people of his time. He was fulfilling that Malachian prophecy.
Though John himself in John's Gospel denies being Elijah.
Right, which commentators explore. Maybe John meant he wasn't literally Elijah reincarnated, while Jesus meant he came in the spirit and power of Elijah, fulfilling the role. It's an interesting nuance.
And the most dramatic appearance is the Transfiguration.
Definitely. Elijah appears alongside Moses, talking with Jesus on the mountain as Peter, James, and John watch.
Moses representing the law, Elijah the prophets.
That's the classic interpretation, the entire Old Testament witness affirming Jesus. Some see it as them symbolically handing over their authority to Jesus. And it's significant, sources note, that both Moses and Elijah had mysterious departures from earth, making their appearance here even more striking.
Are there other mentions in the New Testament?
Yes. Jesus refers to him in Luke 4 as an example of a prophet rejected in his own time. Paul quotes the Horeb story in Romans 11 when arguing God hasn't rejected Israel, citing the 7,000 faithful. And James, as we mentioned, uses him in James 5 as the prime example of a righteous person whose prayer is powerful and effective, emphasizing again his relatable humanity.
And like in Judaism, he's venerated beyond the text.
Oh yes. As a saint in Catholic, Orthodox, and some Lutheran traditions, his feast day is typically July 20th or August 2nd. He's a patron saint of various things, including Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he's hugely important for the Carmelite order, founded on Mount Carmel, who see him as their spiritual father, a model of contemplation and zeal.
The sources also mention some more unusual connections, like with pagan gods.
Yeah, that comes up. There's sometimes a folk connection made between Elijah and Helios, the Greek sun god, maybe because of the fiery chariot, but the sources tend to downplay that as a direct origin for Christian shrines, saying Helios wasn't really a mountaintop god.
But maybe Zeus.
A stronger parallel there, some scholars suggest. Zeus was associated with mountains and controlling weather, thunder, lightning, rain. Elijah's contest was on a mountain, and he brought the rain back. So you can see how, in popular imagination, Elijah might have taken over some attributes previously associated with Zeus or similar figures.
And in Slavic regions, he got mixed up with thunder gods.
Yes, figures like Perun. In some folklore, Elijah becomes Elijah the Thunderer, driving his chariot across the sky, causing storms. It's a classic example of syncretism, where elements of older beliefs get absorbed into the new faith.
Fascinating how these things blend. Okay, what about Islam?
Elijah is recognized as a prophet in Islam, known as Elias.
He's in the Quran.
Yes, mentioned by name, particularly in Surah 6 and Surah 37. The Quran praises him, recounting his call to his people to worship Allah alone and abandon Baal. It notes that most rejected his message, but some were faithful. He's called one of our faithful servants, and peace is invoked upon him.
And Islamic tradition aligns with the biblical timeline.
Generally, yes, placing his ministry during the reign of Ahab and Jezebel, and identifying him as the predecessor to Eliasa, who is Elisha.
Does he feature in Islamic folklore, too?
He does. There's a common tradition associating him with Kadir, a mysterious, wise figure sometimes considered immortal. Legends depict Elias and Kadir meeting annually, sometimes having drunk together from the Fountain of Youth.
And the Belbek connection, a city in Lebanon.
Yet, some older theories tried to link Elijah Helios to the city of Baalbek because the name contains Baal. But the sources say modern scholars mostly reject this. There's no mention of Baalbek in the relevant scriptures, and it seems based purely on the name, similarity ironic, given Elijah fought against Baal.
Okay. And the Druze religion?
Elijah is highly revered by the Druze. He's considered one of their main prophets.
Do they identify him with Kadir, too?
Yes, very much so. Al-Qud, meaning the green one, symbolizing life and water, a healer figure. For the Druze, Elijah Hektu is a central figure and a patron saint, along with Jethro, Shuaibi. The large Druze presence on Mount Carmel today is directly linked to their devotion to Elijah at that key site.
So strong connections there. And finally, the Bahá'í Faith.
In the Bahá'í Faith, the belief is that the Bab, who is the forerunner to Baha'u'llah, the founder, represents the spiritual return of both Elijah and John the Baptist.
Both figures who were precursors.
Exactly. And they see it as highly significant that the Bab's shrine, his final resting place, is on Mount Carmel, the very mountain of Elijah's great confrontation.
Wow. From ancient Israel to modern faiths across the globe, it's an incredible journey tracing his significance. Looking back over everything, the biblical story, the interpretations, what are the main takeaways from Elijah's life that resonate today?
Well, several things really stand out, I think. First, just his sheer courage, standing up to power, challenging widespread idolatry when it was dangerous. That model of courageous faith is powerful.
And his total reliance on God, right? For food, for strength, for the miracles themselves.
Absolutely, complete dependence. But then, crucially, there's the Horeb episode. It shows that even the most faithful, most powerful figures hit rock bottom. They experience fear, loneliness, despair. It makes them relatable.
And God's response there, not just power, but gentle sustenance and that still small voice.
Exactly. It teaches us about God's different ways of working and how he meets us in our vulnerability, not just in our strength.
His zeal for God's covenant is also clear. And his prayer life, James, highlights its effectiveness.
Definitely. And you can't forget the mentorship aspect with Elisha, the importance of raising up the next generation, passing on the mantle.
And finally, just seeing how Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Druze, Bahá'í Faith, how they all engage with his story, interpret it, revere him. It adds so many layers. It gives you a much richer, more complex picture of his enduring impact.
He's a figure who clearly continues to speak across centuries and cultures.
This has been a really fantastic deep dive. Thanks for unpacking all that from the sources. So much to think about.
His story certainly leaves you with a lot to chew on.
It really does. And maybe here's a final thought for you listening. We often focus on the fiery prophet, right? The one on Carmel, calling down fire, confronting kings. It's dramatic, powerful.
The highlight real moments.
Exactly. But the sources force us to look at the other side, too. The same man fleeing in terror, sitting under a bush wanting to die, exhausted, alone, and how God met him there, not with more fire and wind, but with food, rest, and that quiet whisper. How does that image, the vulnerable, despairing Elijah, change how you see the whole story? It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about where strength really comes from and how we truly connect with the divine, even in our lowest moments. Something to think about.